And then there was the Shire folk. I began to have a warm place in my heart for them in the long winter, which none of you can remember. They were very hard put to it then, one of the worst pinches they have been in, dying of cold and starving in the dreadful dearth that followed. But that was the time to see their courage, and their pity one for another. It was by their pity as much as by their tough, uncomplaining courage that they survived. I wanted them still to survive. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we will be looking at what happened during some of the fiercest and hardest winters in Middle-earth, those named the Long Winter and Fell Winters, as indeed it's getting to be winter where I'm at. For more related information, please check out the articles and videos in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for being here. Let's journey back into Middle-earth together. Starting chronologically, we must first examine the Fell Winter of the First Age. Now, the cold itself that issued from the north, even before this fell winter, during times such as the Years of the Lamps, was a legacy and power of Melkor, he who from the beginning of the world wielded cold and fire against the other Valar. Even Mordor, another legacy of his since he created Mount Doom, was a place that seemed wrought of terrible fire and ash, just as the lava of Orodruin was. Yet that land itself also had a chilling bite of cold upon it, right alongside its fiery chasms. Thus, whenever winters were fiercest throughout the history of Middle-earth, we may assume that the legacy of Melkor was also at play. The argument can be made that such bitter winters were also related to the evils of Melkor, since Middle-earth was originally flat, and then it was made round during the changing and reshaping of the world in 3319 of the Second Age. And we're not sure if Iluvatar put a tilt in the world's axis or not, or if simply the seasons were made manifest due to the powers of the Valar, including the legacy of Melkor. I'm not sure, perhaps after the reshaping the world did have a tilt in its axis, but it's interesting conjecture to ponder regardless. Thus, even whilst Melkor yet walked the earth as Morgoth in the First Age, the first fell winter came over Middle-earth. It was the winter at the end of 495 of the First Age into the beginning of 496. It was said to be an especially long and bitter winter, with ice and snow coming from November to March. Now, this winter came right after the fall of Nargothrond, one of the first great elven kingdoms to fall in Middle-earth, but certainly not the last. This fell winter would make Turin's journey back to his home of Dor Lomin, under the curse of Glaurung, all the more painful, and Turin Varanwe's journey from Nevrast to Gondolin even more difficult. On their respective journeys, these two cousins, Tur and Turin, would pass near each other, although Tur alone would see Turin, not knowing who this strange man with the black blade was. Again, since this followed the end of Nargothrond, I must assume that this winter had something to do with Morgoth's newfound power over the land of Beleriand, or at least was a symbol for it. Now, even after the end of Melkor or Morgoth's time in Middle-earth, many of his legacies lingered on, which may be cited in the Marring of Arda, the scarring of the world that Melkor and his time in it committed. One such legacy may have been the Long Winter and Fell Winter that followed in the Third Age. The Long Winter, from November of 2758 to March of 2759 of the Third Age, was perhaps the hardest winter for the greatest number of people in the history of Middle-earth, but especially for the Rohirrim and Hobbits of the Shire. The Rohirrim were engaged in a war with the Dunlendings and their allies among the Easterlings at the time, and this winter certainly did not help. Due to the extreme weather and cold, many of the Rohirrim were forced to take refuge in the Hornburg, as Rohan was buried in great snowfall, and many of these people were starving. Even while Wulf the Dunlending sat in the hall of Meduseld and Edoras and called himself king. The true king, Helm Hammerhand, was at the Hornburg, and his son and heir Haleth was slain in the war, while his other son Hama would be lost to the snow. Helm himself would freeze to death whilst ambushing Dunlendings in the winter. He would freeze upright in the snow. During this same time, Haradrim and Corsairs were ambushing the coasts of Gondor all along the border, even up to the river Isen. And due to Rohan's plight, the Rohirrim could not send aid, nor could Gondor aid the Rohirrim either. Looking further northwards in the Shire, many thousands of hobbits perished in this same winter, and not only because of the snow and cold, but because of the subsequent famine caused by this winter. The Days of Dearth, they were called. And that famine lasted even into 2760, 2 years after the winter began. Gandalf the Grey aided the hobbits at this time, and in fact it was during this winter when Gandalf grew immensely fond of hobbits, for he saw that, when put to the test, hobbits had courage, pity for one another, and such virtues allowed them to survive. Gandalf would remember this when he chose Bilbo for an adventure many decades later, and would discuss this long winter with Pippin and some others after the fall of Sauron and the return of the king to the throne of Gondor. Of course, no matter how great and terrible the snows, or how cold the frost, they must thaw and melt eventually. The hobbits would pull back together, and despite their many tragic losses, their courage and pity saw them survive the long winter and make the Shire a peaceful and prosperous land once more. In Rohan, though there would also be a famine, the great snows melted and flooded the Entwash, making its mouths a fen. But the Rohirrim, including Freyolf, whose people lasted through the winter in Dunharrow, avenged their kin and retook Rohan from the Dunlendings. They also had the aid of Baragond, the son of the Steward of Gondor at the time, for he had been able to defeat the Corsairs at last and send help to Rohan and its prince Freyolf. However, Rohan would take a long time to recover, and soon after Sauron moved into Isengard, which would not allow the Dunlendings to return there, but for greater power that would eventually use the Dunlendings once more to grow there. Finally, we come to the fell winter of the Third Age, from November of 2911 to March of 2912, and the last named winter we have in Tolkien's works. This winter was admittedly less terrible for many inhabitants of Middle-earth, as Sauron's forces were still recovering from the War of Dwarves and Orcs, and other wars, and the cold did not reach as far southwards. But it was still a tragic winter for some, including our dear hobbits once again. For the Shire folk, food ran short again, and the Brandywine River was frozen, which allowed white wolves to cross the river and attack the poor hobbits. This was the last time before the events of The Lord of the Rings that the horn call of Buckland had been sounded. However, I imagine Gandalf and the Rangers, who provided food for the hobbits during this harsh period, also aided in driving off the white wolves. In the spring, the snow and ice melted, which did not extend south past the river Greyflood in Eriador, nor the Wilderlands in Rovanion. The excess amount of meltwater made great floods around the Greyflood River, and probably in Rovanion around Anduin as well, and the Dunlendings and other folk in Enedwaith suffered. Bilbo Baggins was in his 20s during this winter, and likely remembered throughout his life the hardships that came with it. But once again, the strength of hobbits would shine through, and they would again recover from this winter. Hopefully in the years that the peoples of Middle-earth did not suffer such terrible winters, they were able to enjoy the snows more, and the legacies of Morgoth were weakened. And so, we come to the end of our tale about the long and fell winters in Middle-earth. From the stories of these winters, we see that, even during the harshest times, if we all come together with courage and pity, there is nothing too terrible that we cannot overcome, just as the Hobbits, Rohirrim, and many others did. It is in that spirit that I would like to announce a charity livestream for Wednesday, December 15th, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The past few years have been tough on many people around the world, and I wanted to use my next livestream as a chance to donate to the International Rescue Committee. Thus, I have named it Helping the People of Our Middle-earth. I've been so very fortunate in my life, and I'm excited to donate to this cause to share those blessings with others, and I hope you will join me. Just as the Hobbits did, we have to look out for each other. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video on some of the harshest winters in Middle-earth, even if these tales were sorrowful. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections on these stories? Let me know in the comments below. For me, I do think Morgoth's legacy and the scars he left on the world certainly impacted the tragic events our characters had to go through during these winters. But it is inspiring to see the courage and pity of our friends in Middle-earth when they stood together during these tough times. Thanks to our Valor tier patrons, Adrian de la Torre, Chris Ortner, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralik, Blair Scatton, Merton, John Hume, Jennifer Wood, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Quantum Catalyst, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, Kondar, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrolik, Kuzan, and Brandon Glidden. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of our patrons. It really means a lot. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again on Wednesday with that live stream, and then again next Sunday with a video essay on how the Fellowship of the Ring film impacted culture and cinema. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.